Hello, it's 1 o'clock. We welcome you to today's virtual public meeting. It's about the proposed testbed initiative demonstration. I'm Dana Cowley with contractor Hanford Mission Integration Solutions, and this meeting is being recorded. Today's event is an opportunity for the Department of Energy, Washington River Protection Solutions, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to present the, ready for this? Draft Waste Incidental to Reprocessing Evaluation for the testbed initiative demonstration. And of course, we're also here to answer your questions. This is all part of a 90-day public comment period that will end February 2nd in 2022, so there'll be plenty of time for you to get your comments in after the holidays. Now, for those of you who are joining us on Microsoft Teams, we'll be using the chat box. Your computer might be different, but for most people, it's in the upper right-hand corner, and the chat box looks like a thought icon. It's next to the hand icon in the chat. And in that, we've added the link to the Hanford.gov events calendar. There, you're going to find all of today's meeting contents, details about how you can submit your comments, and also a link about this meeting so we can continue to improve. For the participants who called in on the phone, you automatically join the phone on mute. If you want to ask a question, to unmute yourself, you press *6 on your phone, and then to return back to mute, it's the same command, press *6. And we ask that everyone please remain muted until, unless you're asking a question, because it just creates too much background noise. So if you need to step away from your call, please don't put your call on hold. You can always just hang up, call back if you get the chance later. You can submit questions at any time using the chat box. Colleen Drinkard will be monitoring that carefully, and we'll make sure we call on people in the order that they submitted. You can read your question at the appropriate time, or if you'd like to ask it aloud, just put yourself in queue in the chat and we'll call on you. Of course, if you're just on the phone, I'll go to you, call for you periodically because we want to hear everyone. And if you would please, just ask one question. We want to make sure we get all the questions answered, and then if people have second or third questions, we'll get back and do the best we can, but we do want to keep on schedule today if possible. Now, enough about all of that. Let's get right on to the presentation. We have Sherry Ross. She's joining us from DOE headquarters, and she provides this WIR overview. Sherry, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you perfectly. Thank you, Sherry.
Okay,
Please
great.
proceed.
Okay, thank you. So they're going to pull up some...
Jan is pulling up the presentation right now. So.
Okay, great. So, hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Sherry Ross, and I work for the U.S. Department of Energy, the Office of Environmental Management, and the Office of Regulatory Compliance. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today in this public meeting. We're here to provide information and answer questions. I'm just going to provide an overview, an introduction and overview of the draft waste incidental reprocessing evaluation for the testbed initiative demonstration that's planned at Hanford. And if you can hold your questions to the end of the presentation, there's going to be plenty of time for you to ask questions. And with that said, let's go to the next slide.
Oh, picture.
Okay, so the topics I plan to cover today are just what's the purpose of the draft WIR evaluation and the scope. Has DOE made other determinations? What's the consultation and public process for it? How are we going to make decisions? What's the WIR criteria, and how to submit comments to the Department of Energy? Next slide. Okay, so DOE's previously decided to separate low activity waste from other tank waste and vitrify and glass some of that waste, some of the low activity waste. So DOE has not selected a supplemental treatment method for treatment of all the the remaining low activity waste, because the capacity for the VIT plant doesn't have capacity for all of the low activity waste. DOE is proposing the TBI, the Test Bed Initiative demonstration, to demonstrate at an engineering scale a potential supplemental low activity waste treatment approach. So the Test Bed Initiative demonstration, it concerns 2,000 gallons of tank SY101 supernate It's going to be pre-treated. It's going to be using in-tank settling, decanting, filtration, and ion exchange in an in-tank pre-treatment system that's going to be located inside of tank SY101. The pre-treated waste will be solidified by grouting at an off-site commercial treatment facility, and the solidified waste will be disposed at an off-site commercial facility, either Energy Solutions near Clive, Utah, or Waste Control Specialists, the Federal Waste Facility near Andrews, Texas. DOE has prepared this draft waste incidental reprocessing evaluation to assess whether the separated, pre-treated, and solidified tank waste meets the criteria in the DOE manual and appropriate for management as low-level waste. Okay, next slide. So this is not a new approach. DOE's made other numerous waste WIR determinations for waste at other DOE sites, such as West Valley in New York. DOE's also made several determinations utilizing a similar criteria, similar to the manual criteria under Section 3116 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2005. We've done those at Savannah Riverside in Idaho for closing tanks and disposal of stabilized low activity waste. So we've provided a comparison of the two methods that are for which we make determinations in an appendix to the draft WIR evaluation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so DOE is consulting with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and you're going to hear from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission after my talk. And we're estimating it's going to take about 6 months, and we're going to do this in an open and public process. DOE has also published the document for public review and are seeking comments from the public on the draft WIR evaluation. We want comments from states, tribal nations, stakeholders, the public, anyone and everyone. Please submit your comments so we can consider those as we move forward into making our decisions. DOE will share all public comments with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission so they can be considered during the consultation process. At the conclusion of NRC's consultation, DOE anticipates that NRC will issue a technical evaluation report or their advice back to the department for our consideration. So we will consider the public comments, all comments received, and the NRC's advice to revise our evaluation, to make a final evaluation. And that becomes the technical basis for which DOE may determine in a future determination whether the pre-treated waste is appropriate and safe to be managed as low-level waste. Okay. During this process, all these documents will be available to the public, and the dates in red here are estimates. They can change based on the discussions that's underway with NRC and the questions that they're asking and how long it might take to answer those. But this is the estimate for now. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the more detail of the public process as anticipated. As mentioned, this process is open to the public. The NRC is currently reviewing DOE's documents, and this is the initial the second green box there. This is the initial public meeting, which we're having today, to describe the draft evaluation and the process that's going to be used. And so you're going to hear from not only DOE, but NRC and the site contractor to describe these activities today. The next step in the process, NRC may ask questions of DOE. Those will be provided in writing, and we call those a request for additional information. It's there and identified as an RAI, short on the form here. That document will be made public, and DOE and NRC will have a public meeting where NRC will describe the questions that they're asking of DOE. DOE is going to respond to those questions in writing, and then we'll have a public meeting where we explain those responses to NRC in a public format, and they will ask questions of us. And then NRC is going to finalize their advice, their consultation advice, back to DOE in a report, and we will consider those as with all the public comments that we receive to finalize our evaluation and analysis related to this activity. And then we will prepare that final document, and then based on that, a potential determination, a management decision will be made. So when there will be probably conference calls between DOE and NRC staff to talk specific topics, and those will be made available to the public. We'll post those on the website, so you can join those if you want to. The purpose of those calls is for interactions between DOE and NRC, not to answer public comments, but for you can listen to the conversation that's going on. Those will prepare a meeting summary, and we'll post those for public access as well. Next slide. So the criteria that's used to make the decision, is it safe to be managed as low-level waste, are posted here. You're going to hear more about these in detail from both NRC and Carrie later today. They're going to go through more detail, but there's 3 criteria. We're to remove the key radionuclides to the max extent technically and economically practical. We're going to ensure that the waste, when its disposition, will meet the performance objectives that are defined in 10 CFR 61. And we're going to make the waste a solid physical form that's not going to exceed Class C concentration limits. And that's the whole purpose of the draft evaluation. There's a chapter for each of these 3 criteria. You're going to hear more about these later. And the whole purpose of the document is to describe, to demonstrate that the criteria will be met. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can find the draft WIR evaluation on the internet at these 2 locations. And they both work. I tried them here in South Carolina, and I got access using both of those addresses there, the website addresses. And so if you have any problems, let us know. Let Jennifer know, and we'll be more to try to make that work. But they're up and running. I was able to get it from both of those addresses. Okay, next slide. You can submit your comments. We prefer in writing, please, either by email to the TBI WIR at rl.gov. So TBI WIR at rl.gov, or you can send it by mail to Jennifer Colburn, and her address is listed there. And we do want those comments by February the 2nd of 2022. And if you submit them just a little bit late, we'll be more than happy. We will address any late submitted comments to the extent that we can. We appreciate that. Okay, next slide. And I think that's all I've got. Yes, questions. If you'll go back to the previous slide and keep that up while anyone who has questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Sherry. We appreciate that, and we are ready for questions. We ended a little early on this presentation, so there is plenty of time. Colleen, do we have anybody in the queue?
I don't have anybody in the queue, and I do not see any hands raised at this point.
All right. We want to hear your questions. We want to get this answered for you. I know there's been quite a bit of discussion and excitement about this possibility, so please don't hesitate. If you're on the phone only, hit *6 to unmute and go ahead and ask your question, please. *6 to unmute. All right, let's check back. Any questions in the chat one more time?
No questions in the chat.
All right, thank you, Colleen. One more time to the phone. *6 to unpound to ask your question. I see we have quite a few people with us on the line and in the chat. We would love to answer anything you have. All right, well, Sherry, you did an excellent job of explaining, and you did such a good job, there are no questions. So Thank you very much, Sherry. Stay with us in case we have more questions coming forward. And now we will move ahead. We have George Alexander, who's joining us from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Welcome, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Dana. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you just perfectly. And Jen will have your presentation up. I think we see that. And so please go ahead. We are ready to hear from you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us. I've had the opportunity to work with several of you, but for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity to work with, I'm a risk analyst with a background in geochemistry and hydrogeology. I've been with the NRC since 2008. Let me just turn that off for bandwidth's sake. So I've been with the agency since 2008 in the branch formerly known as the Performance Assessment Branch, and I'm now with the Risk and Technical Analysis Branch. The presentation that I have for anyone that's participated previously in the DOE NRC VLAW discussions, this presentation will be similar. All right, let's go ahead on to the second slide, please. All right, so I will discuss briefly NRC's role at Hanford, the criteria that we'll review, the basis for determining if the waste is incidental to reprocessing. We'll discuss the products that we're going to provide from the acceptance review, any requests for additional information, and a technical evaluation report. And we'll also discuss the schedule for those products. Next slide, please. So many of you are already familiar with WIR, but in short, WIR is waste from reprocessing that can be managed as low-level radioactive waste because of the low level of risk. And the low risk can result from separation and in some cases further decontamination of low-level fraction of waste. In the case of the testbed initiative, that process will include settling, decanting, filtering, ion exchange, and then solidification. And then the residuals with a higher activity fraction will be left in place and further stabilized. Next slide, please. So again, NRC's role at Hanford with respect to WIR, we'll review the review of the testbed initiative, draft WIR evaluation. We have the interagency agreement at Hanford. And at Hanford, that is a consultation only role. We will not have a monitoring role at Hanford. Next slide, please. So typically, for our process, DOE submits its draft WIR evaluation for NRC to review. We've received that at the end of October. Consultation typically includes scoping meetings or technical exchanges, followed by any requests for additional information, and then ultimately a NRC technical evaluation report or TER. Next slide, please. And contact information, if anybody needs it. With respect to project management, Maurice's contact information is provided here, as well as our backup PRIA. I'm the technical reviewer with my contact information, and then our branch chiefs for this project from the low-level waste and projects branch is Melissa Ralph, and from the risk and technical analysis branch is Chris McKenney. So our numbers are located there and email addresses if anybody would like to get in touch with us. Next slide, please. The criteria that we're using to determine if it is for the reprocessing waste is WIR. There's 3 sets of similar criteria. The Hanford DOE Manual 435.1-1. With West Valley, there's the NRC West Valley Policy Statement, and the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for Savannah River Site in Idaho. And the criteria are generally consistent. All require removing key rads to the maximum extent practical, and all require disposal to meet the performance objectives of 10 CFR Part 61. Next slide, please. With respect to 10 CFR Part 61, Subpart C, we have 6141, which is protection of the general population. 6142, protection of individuals from inadvertent intrusion. 6143, protection of individuals during operations. And lastly, 6144, stability of the disposal site after closure. Next slide, please. So with what we review, as Sherry previously mentioned, we'll conduct a completeness review or an acceptance review of the documents that have been provided. We'll review the draft WIR evaluation document, starting with the supporting or the primary documents first, and then as necessary, any secondary references. And on the next slide, This will be reviewed with respect to New Reg 1854, the NRC staff guidance for activities related to U.S. DOE waste determinations. This is available publicly if anybody's interested. The Adams accession number is located there with the ML number if anybody needs that. Next slide, please. All right, with the schedule, so the NRC received the draft WIR evaluation on October 29th. NRC will transmit the acceptance or completeness review letter by November 29th. NRC will complete the detailed technical review and issue REIs, REI comments, if necessary, to DOE by January 20th. If REI comments are necessary, we tentatively planned on DOE transmitting REI responses to the NRC by February 28th. NRC is anticipating completing the TER by April 1st. We will have a teleconference with DOE to discuss the findings on April 15th, and then ultimately transmit the TER to DOE by May 6th. Next slide, please. Again, as Sherry mentioned, this is to be a clear and open and public process. NRC is an independent federal agency whose decision is based solely on the merits of the material provided, and we strive to provide a clear and technically sound basis for the findings. Again, thank you for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, I'm available, as well as my branch chief, Chris McKinney, and maybe Dave Esch as well.
Thank you, George. We appreciate the presentation very much. And so let's get right to our questions. Colleen, do we have anyone in the chat?
Yeah, we do. We have a question from Dwayne Schumacher. He says, Ecology has stated the vitrification standard still applies to waste DOE determines to be low-level waste that comes from Hanford tanks. What are DOE and NRC positions regarding this point for waste being disposed out of Washington State en route, like is planned for the TBI WIR?
All right. Whoever would like to answer the question, please go ahead and turn your camera on, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, if no one else is going to answer the question, I guess I'll jump in. And George, you can give NRC's perspective. This really is getting into hazardous waste requirements, which is regulated under RCRA, and the state of ecology is the agency to regulate that. This determination has to do with its radiological characteristics, just the rad portion. It's not associated with the hazardous constituent, so it's really outside the scope of the WIR evaluation. This determination will decide whether it's high level or low level. The vitrification standard is what DOE has described as appropriate for high level waste. So this is an area for discussion between DOE and ecology, and I think when we submit, we'll have to submit a RCRA permit. I think it's a research development and demonstration permit to ecology before this demonstration can occur if DOE decides to proceed forward. There's a number of things that DOE has to do. We need to finish this WIR evaluation, finalize the document considering NRC's comments and the public comments to make a determination. We have NEPA that has to be completed, and we'll also have to have a permit from ecology. So, at this point, this decision would determine that the waste is not high level waste, it's low level, appropriate for management is low level, and we'll have to have that discussion with ecology related to treatment for its RCRA constituents. George, you want to add anything?
I don't have anything. I don't have anything else to add. Thanks, Sherry.
Okay, you're welcome.
Actually, this is Chris McKinney. I'm going to add one thing. This is NRC. And just to say that our review will be focusing on the final disposition of the waste and the appropriateness for that disposal site at WCS.
Any further comments on this question before we move on? All right, is there anyone on the phone who would like to ask a question? *6 to unpound. Unmute. *6.
Hello, this is Dan Solis. I've been trying to raise my hand in Zoom and not having much luck.
Oh, sorry, Dan, I can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead and ask your question.
It's a general question about modeling. I guess I thought with the advent of quantum computing, the cost of modeling and the ease of modeling would go down. But in reviewing this on social media, I get the information back that it's not the computer capacity that's raising the cost of modeling, but the inability or the unavailability of modelers. Is that your sense of it too? That modeling is costly and difficult because there are not enough people trained and working in the field?
This is George. Just from my own personal perspective, I haven't noticed any difference in availability of modelers. I've worked with several different sites for materials decommissioning, uranium mill tailing sites, and some other WIR sites, and I've typically been working with the same folks. So I haven't noticed it from my perspective, but that's just anecdotal evidence.
Oh, do you think that the quantum computing will bring down the cost of modeling?
I apologize. I don't have any insight into where the quantum computing is at with respect to the type of modeling that we do. I don't know if anybody else has any additional perspective on that.
I may have seen a comment from David Esch. Did you want to add further to that answer?
No, this is, sorry, yeah, this is Dave. I was commenting on the previous question. Yeah, so it was on the one about the vitrification standard, just so people understand. NRC doesn't have a standard for vitrification of this type of waste. We believe any waste forms that could meet the performance objectives would be appropriate. I just wanted the public and the person that asked that question to understand that.
Thank you. That is helpful. I appreciate that. Any other parts to this answer before we move on to our next question?
And I would just add that there was a comment from Tracy about the WIR mentions Utah, and the TBI demonstration does include WCS as well as energy solutions.
My home state. Also, if you don't mind, when we're answering the questions, if you're answering a question, if you could turn your camera on, I think sometimes that's helpful to our audience. Not required, but just a request. And Colleen, do we have someone else up in the chat, please?
Yes, Jeff Burright has a question. Feel free to unmute your device, Jeff, and ask your question.
Thank you. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, I hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, great, thanks.
Yes.
And Chris was a good lead into it. I'm curious about the NRC's review of the second criterion, the long-term performance, and essentially how deep are you going to go into the performance assessments that are underpinning the waste acceptance criteria for the offsite landfills? Are you taking it as written that they were acceptable, or has the NRC already done some review to support those waste acceptance criteria? Thanks.
George, sorry, thanks, Jeff. We're going to be working with the state of Texas and state of Utah to discuss the fact that those are our agreement states, and therefore they have the authority to regulate their low-level waste sites under NRC and as a peer to NRC. And so they have issued the licenses for those sites and established the waste acceptance criteria. And so we will be working with those states to evaluate and ensure how these inventories that would be impacted by this waste going to those sites, and was that already evaluated or not. We are not going to redo the analyses that the states have used for their determination of licensing of the site, but just to ensure that it's within the licensing basis that the state has already performed. That's very similar to, if you look on our website, I'm pretty sure we have it still there, the West Valley melter, and it's was shipped down to WCS nearly 10 years ago now, and that was the scope of the review for that portion of the analysis, was not to redo the performance assessment, but to ensure that the inventory and the type of waste was within the bounds of what was already assumed in establishing the license.
Any other additions to that answer for Jeff?
If I can just
All right.
reflect on what I heard before I move on. Thank you, Chris. The observation I would make is that the WIR evaluation does say that at least the federal waste facility at Texas will be federal property someday eventually. So it's kind of like a federal facility in waiting. Thanks.
Right, and so but the state of Texas still helped did establish the waste control specialists' waste acceptance criteria for that part. Even though after closure, it will be transferred to the federal facility. It will be transferred back to the federal government under the state of Texas's AEA authority, Atomic Energy Act authority. I shouldn't be using acronyms.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chris. Colleen, is there another question?
I have no other questions in chat, and I do not see any other hands raised.
Yes, I'm not either. So let's go to the phone line. If you're just calling in, please hit *6 to unmute and ask your question. We're eager to make sure everyone's question is answered. Not hearing any questions on the phone. Let's double check the hand raising and the chat one more time. I see many people with us, but I'm not seeing questions or hands raised. *6 to unmute if you're on the phone and you'd like to ask a question. Just one more check, please. All right. I guess this means we are clear to move on to the third and final presentation. Let's join Carrie Prindeville now. She's with Washington River Protection Solutions, and she will have a presentation for us. There it is. I see the presentation. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Carrie. Are you ready?
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. Please go ahead and thank you.
All right, thanks. So good afternoon. My name is Carrie Prindeville. I work for Washington River Protection Solutions, a contractor to the DOE, and I'll be presenting a summary level discussion of the main points of the draft waste incidental to reprocessing evaluation for the testbed initiative demonstration at Hanford, also referred to as the TBI WIR. For more complete details, please refer to the TBI WIR evaluation document, which is available online at the hanford.gov website, which was shown in Sherry's presentation. Next slide, please. In this presentation, I'll discuss the following topics. Number 1, the testbed initiative demonstration background. Number 2, provide a description of the TBI demonstration system, referred to as the intake pretreatment system, or ITPS. And number 3, provide an overview of the 3 waste incidental to reprocessing criteria, which includes criteria 1, removal of key radionuclides, criteria 2, disposal facility performance objectives, criteria 3, solidification of the pretreated waste to meet 10 CFR 6155 Class C concentration limits, and lastly, the conclusion of this draft WIR evaluation. Next slide, please. So as background, treating and stabilizing Hanford's radioactive waste that is currently stored in underground tanks is a high priority. The site is preparing to begin treating some of the tank waste using a vitrification process, which involves immobilizing the waste in a glass matrix at the Waste Treatment and Immobilization Plant, WTP, via the Direct Feed Low Activity Waste DFLAW program. DOE has not selected a treatment method for the remaining low activity waste, so in parallel with implementation of DFLAW, DOE-EM is working with the state of Washington to consider additional pre-treatment options. This proposed TBI demonstration will demonstrate on an engineering scale a treatment option to potentially augment and accelerate the mission to disposition Hanford tank waste. Previously, a WIR evaluation and determination was successfully made on a 3-gallon laboratory scale test of pre-treated low activity waste. Next slide, please. So starting the proposed TBI demonstration is contingent upon number 1, DOE completing a final WIR evaluation. Number 2, making a WIR determination. Number 3, completing the appropriate analysis and documentation required by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And number 4, receiving a permit modification from the state of Washington. If DOE undertakes the proposed TBI demonstration, then an in-tank pretreatment system will be installed in double shell tank SY101 to remove radioactive solids from approximately 2,000 gallons of supernate that will be retrieved via decanting. The resulting pre-treated liquid waste will be transported in DOT certified totes to an off-site commercial treatment facility for solidification, and the solidified waste will be disposed of as mixed low-level waste at a licensed and permitted facility that is outside the state of Washington. Next slide, please. In the TBI demonstration, double shell tank SY101 was selected for retrieval via decanting of 2,000 gallons of liquid supernate waste. As shown here, the waste in tank SY101 consists of 2 layers, a solid salt cake layer below a liquid supernate layer. As a side note, the volumes here shown are as of October of 2020, and Hanford tank waste volume estimates are updated monthly and may change slightly each month due to evaporation and transpiration. Next slide. So after settling, approximately 2,000 gallons of liquid supernate will be retrieved via decanting and pre-treated using the system depicted here that is installed in tank SY101. This system will remove radioactive solids using filtration and will also remove cesium-137 using an ion exchange column that contains crystalline silicotitanate or CST resin. Next slide, please. So after pre-treatment through the ITPS, the pre-treated liquid will be pumped into DOT certified type A totes and transported to an off-site commercial treatment facility to be solidified in grout. At this time, multiple treatment facilities are being considered, which includes Permafix Northwest in Richland, Washington, Energy Solutions near Clive, Utah, Permafix Diversified Scientific Services in Kingston, Tennessee, and the Waste Control Specialist near Andrews, Texas. Next slide, please. So 2 commercial facilities are being considered for the disposal of the pre-treated and solidified waste as mixed low-level waste, and those facilities include Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility near Andrews, Texas, and Energy Solutions Clive Disposal Facility, Clive, Utah. Next slide, please. So listed here are the 3 WIR criteria from DOE Manual 435.1-1, which must be met in order to reach a final WIR determination. Simply stated, criteria 1 is the removal of key radionuclides to the maximum extent technically and economically practical. Criteria 2 involves meeting the performance objectives of the disposal facility comparable to 10 CFR 61 subpart C. Next slide, please. And criteria 3 provides that the waste will be in a solid physical form that does not exceed Class C concentration limits per 10 CFR 6155. Next slide, please. So WIR criteria 1, key radionuclides. What are key radionuclides? So key radionuclides are those radionuclides that, using a risk-informed approach, could significantly contribute to radiological risk towards workers, the public, and the environment. Are listed in Table 1 and Table 2 of 10 CFR 6155, which are comparable to the radionuclides included in both the Texas and Utah administrative codes, and are also included in the waste acceptance criteria for the Energy Solutions Disposal Facility and Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility. Meeting the waste acceptance criteria will ensure that the facility's performance objectives will be met. Next slide, please. These tables show the key radionuclides identified in waste acceptance criteria at the Energy Solutions Disposal Facilities and also at the Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility, which mirror Table 1 and Table 2 of 10 CFR 6155. Again, meeting the disposal facilities waste acceptance criteria will ensure that the performance objectives of those disposal facilities will be met. So in the context of the TBI WIR evaluation, meeting the waste acceptance criteria means meeting Class C low-level waste concentration limits for disposal at the Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility near Andrews, Texas, or meeting Class A low-level waste concentration limits for the disposal at Energy Solutions Disposal Facility near Clive, Utah, although meeting Class A concentration limits is not a WIR criteria per DOE Manual Order 435.1-1. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So with respect to the key radionuclides, this draft TBI WIR evaluation shows that approximately 98.8% of the key radionuclides will be removed after in-tank pretreatment, which includes filtration and ion exchange. And as a result, approximately 1.8 curies will remain in the 2,000 gallons of pretreated supernatant, which is equivalent to 30 millionths of a % of the total activity limit at Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility, and 200 millionths of a % of the estimated activity limit at the Energy Solutions Mixed Waste Landfill Cell. So the estimated activity limit was based on a Class A limit for cesium-137, which is 1 curie per cubic meter, and the volume of the mixed waste landfill cell. And that was because cesium is about 84% of the activity in the pretreated low activity waste. In other words, cesium represents about 1.5 of the 1.8 curies that remains in the SY101 supernatant after pretreatment. Next slide, please. With respect to criteria 2, disposal facility performance objectives, meeting the waste acceptance criteria at Energy Solutions Mixed Waste Landfill Cell or at the Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility ensures that compliance with the performance objectives for those disposal facilities will be achieved. The waste acceptance criteria are based on the projected total inventory, linking these criteria directly to the calculated disposal site performance, and the radionuclides and the pretreated and solidified waste from the 2,000-gallon TBI demonstration would be insignificant contributors to the total allowable inventory of either disposal facility. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jen, actually stay right there. You grabbed 2 slides on the last one.
I saw it. Yeah, I saw
So
that.
go back up a slide. There you go.
Okay, so the draft WIR evaluation shows that the pretreated waste will be in a solid physical form that does not exceed Class C concentration limits for near-surface disposal of low-level radioactive waste per 10 CFR 6155. And will also meet Class A concentration limits per 10 CFR 6155, which is not a WIR criteria per the DOE Manual 435.1-1, but those limits are provided as additional information in this draft WIR evaluation based on the consideration for disposal at the Energy Solutions Disposal Facility. Next slide, please. Disposal of the pre-treated and solidified waste will occur off-site at either the Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility in Texas or Energy Solutions Disposal Facility in Utah. The Waste Control Specialist Federal Waste Facility is licensed and permitted for disposal of Class A, B, and C low-level and mixed low-level waste. The Energy Solutions Disposal Facility is licensed and permitted for disposal of Class A low-level and mixed low-level waste. Next slide, please. So because the waste contains a mixture of radionuclides, the total concentration is determined by a sum of fractions rule specified in 10 CFR 6155 and also in the Texas and Utah administrative codes, both of which parallel the NRC regulation. The sum of fractions in the TBI WIR evaluation is well below 1, indicating that the solidified waste will meet the concentration limits in 10 CFR 6155 for Class A and Class C low-level waste. As a side note, I'd also like to add that the TBI WIR evaluation shows that the sum of fractions is 1 order of magnitude below the Class A limits in both Table 1 and Table 2, and is 2 orders below the Class C limit for Table 1 radionuclides and 5 orders of magnitude below the Class C limit for Table 2 radionuclides. Next slide, please. So the conclusion of the TBI demonstration WIR evaluation are summarized as follows. Criteria 1, the removal of key radionuclides is met by settling, decanting, and filtering the liquid supernatant waste from tank SY101 to remove solids containing nearly all the short-lived strontium-90 and the long-lived insoluble radionuclides such as the uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, and curium, and that using ion exchange media via the in-tank pretreatment system removes over 99% of the radioactive cesium-137. Criteria 2 is met by meeting the disposal site performance objectives comparable to 10 CFR 61 subpart C, which is ensured by meeting the waste acceptance criteria of the disposal facility. Criteria 3 is met by grouting the pretreated low-activity waste into a solid physical form with maximum concentrations of radionuclides that are well below Class C low-level waste concentration limits and are also expected to be far below or slightly below, I should say, Class A low-level waste concentration limits. Next slide, please. So in closing, I'd like to emphasize 3 points regarding the implementation of the TBI WIR demonstration. Number 1, DOE issues a final WIR evaluation and WIR determination. 2,000 gallons of low-activity liquid waste from tank SY101 will be managed as low-level waste once it has been pre-treated during retrieval via decanting, subject to the analysis and commitments in the final WIR evaluation and WIR determination. The pre-treated waste will be stored, transported, solidified via grout, and disposed of as low-level waste. The waste will be solidified via grout at a commercial treatment facility and disposed of as low-level waste at a licensed and permitted commercial facility that is located outside the state of Washington. Next slide, please. So thank you for your participation in the public meeting this afternoon, and we'll be happy to answer questions at this time.
Thank you. That was Carrie Prindeville with Washington River Protection Solutions providing a detailed report. If you are going to answer the questions, please make sure you turn your camera on. If you're wearing a badge, make sure it's not in the shot. And Colleen, who do we have in queue to ask questions, please?
The first question we have in the chat is from Melanie Snyder. The question is, how is the transportation packaging and method for pre-treated waste before grouting being determined?
So this is Richard at DOE. I'm not sure if you can hear me okay. Can I get a confirmation, please?
Yes, I can hear you, Richard.
Okay, thank you. If I'm understanding the question correctly, the way that we would answer it, and please feel free to clarify, is that we do understand that transportation impacts increase in proportion to the distance traveled, and that we will factor in these considerations into the selection of the implementing alternative, and we'll be doing that in our NEPA analysis that we had mentioned earlier in the meeting. At the same time, we also have a separate response, again, if you want to clarify your question, but Buddy, do you want to answer from a
Richard brings up a good point that this is really outside of the scope of the WIR and will be talked about in more detail in the NEPA analysis. However, ultimately, all transportation and packaging will be done in accordance with the Department of Transportation regulations.
All right, was everyone able to hear the answer, and were there any more additions to help answer the question? I have that. All right, is there anyone on the phone who would like to answer a question? *6 to unmute yourself. We're more than an hour ahead of time. We're here and eager to answer your questions, so don't be shy. *6 to unmute and ask a question. All right, not hearing any questions on the phone. Let's go back to the chat. Colleen, anyone else?
I don't see any additional questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised.
Yes, I'm seeing the same thing here. All right, let's make one more call. We have a large group of people here. We are 1 hour ahead. We have plenty of time to answer your questions. There is no bad question. Please go ahead, raise your hand, drop your question in the chat, or hit *6 to unmute. We would love to answer your questions. See Liz Matson on the phone. I see your camera. Liz, do you have a question to ask?
I do, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. I can see you and hear you.
Great.
Please proceed.
I'm just curious if maybe we can have someone or a few people talk about the implications of this WIR on future phases of the test bed initiative. This one's for 2,000 gallons, and it's my understanding the next phase wouldn't be started until the conclusion of phase 2, but it would be for a much larger amount of waste. And in the past, a lot of, at least for Hanford cleanup, a lot of similar documents end up being a template for the next one. So I'm curious if people could talk about how that process is being envisioned, if it would be its own entirely brand new start from scratch WIR, if this was done again with a larger amount of waste, and just if you could talk about that, how the whole thing fits together, and how NRC's role, if any, would change or be the same in any kind of subsequent WIR. Thanks.
Hi, Liz. Again, this is Richard at ORP. Hope you can hear me. So this is the, as we talked about previously, we did a 3-gallon. This would be the engineering scale demonstration that would provide additional proof of concept. I think the key takeaway is if there's any future demonstration, there would be a separate WIR process, a separate regulatory process for NEPA and such. So again, we're focusing the discussion today on just that 2,000 gallons for the engineering scale demonstration.
All right, Richard, thank you for the answer. I see a few other questions here in chat. Colleen, who's up next?
We're going to have Therese ask the question from Nicole Gray.
So Nicole, your first question that's in the chat says, is there any information available on potential routes for transportation?
Hi, Nicole, Richard again at DOE. So that would be best suited for the NEPA evaluation that we'll be doing in the near future. So please refer to that evaluation as it is forthcoming.
Any other additions to answer the question before we move on?
A question from Jerry.
Jerry does have a question. He says the 3-gallon lab test to 2,000 gallons seems like quite a jump. Can somebody please explain?
Hi, Jerry, DOE again, Richard at DOE. So I think we might have alluded to it in the previous answer there, this being really an engineering scale demonstration as we continue on from that 3-gallon previously performed. So don't know if you had any further comment there. That would be our response then.
Those are all the questions that I can see in the chat. I don't see any further hands raised. If you're on the phone, *6 to unmute. We are happy to answer questions to the best of our ability. Not hearing any further questions on the phone. Cerise, anything in the chat?
Yeah, we just received an additional comment from Tom Cecilia asking, will there be public comment opportunity on the NEPA process?
And that was from just guest. So again, Richard at ORP, the focus of this discussion would be on WIR, the NEPA process. You can certainly submit that comment. We'll get back to you in the formal comment space, but I do not believe we envision a further public comment period for NEPA. And I'll ask my contractor support here if there is any additional info they'd like to note.
No, the public comment period for the NEPA evaluation, to the extent required based on the type of evaluation, has already been performed and comments have already been received.
All right. Questions or thoughts? Any other questions or comments? Anything in the chat, Cerise, Colleen?
I do see another question from Jerry, and it says, thank you. And then he's asking if there's quality control issues.
Jerry, we'll probably need to understand your question a little bit better than that.
Jerry, if you'd like to ask the question yourself to clarify. Sometimes it's best done verbally than in the chat. You're welcome to hit *6 to unmute yourself or turn your mic on your Microsoft Teams if you're using that. We'd love to give you more details and hear your question.
Hey, Jerry, this is Richard again. So I think unless there's a little more clarification there, really this is just, again, the jump from 3 to 2,000 is that engineering scale demonstration. And yes, the intent would be to flesh out that proof of concept as we increase the scale of the demonstration. So we do hope to learn, gather as lessons learned as we implement the engineering scale demonstration, so that we can become better informed. Hopefully that answers that.
Well, hey, this is Sherry. I do think it's important to note that, you know, when the waste is decanted and processed through the ITP and put in totes, we will verify through sample analysis, you know, the removal and are we meeting the wax for the next stage. So, I mean, I don't know if he was asking that portion of the question.
Yep, thank you, Sherry. That's a good point. Thank you for adding.
All right, let's go to questions one more time. If you're on the phone, hit *6 to unmute. We'd love to answer your question. Anyone on the phone?
How do you say that name? Naokol?
And Cerise, you have a person ready to ask her their question?
I'm having a hard time pronouncing their name correctly, but the question is, has DOE identified a preferred alternative for treatment facility and disposal facility?
So this is Richard. That has not been determined. As the presentation alluded to, we have multiple treatment and disposal facilities still being considered, and so this evaluation will take those into consideration.
Yes, many more steps to go as we move down this path. Thank you, Richard. Any other questions we have? *6 to unmute and ask your question. You can unmic on Microsoft Teams and go ahead. Again, we have plenty of time. We'd love to answer your questions. Please go ahead. All right, Cerise, I think we have something new here.
I believe this is Liz Matson by looking at the guest name, and it says, how long do you expect this process to take until you start work? And by work, I mean waste being removed from the tank.
Hi, Liz. Richard at DOE again. So we mentioned it at one point in the meeting that this will require permitting, RCRA permitting through an RD&D permit with the state of Washington. And so as part of that process, there's that approval is needed prior to any construction activities taking place. So right now, again, the discussion today being on the WIR evaluation, we talked about the process NRC and ourselves kind of fleshed out the next 6 months or so and what those would look like. And then understanding there's additional work afterwards before we can start those construction activities with the RCRA RD&D permit. So hopefully that answered that. If there's more, please feel free to ask.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure, go right ahead.
Thanks. So this came up in the Hanford Advisory Board's Tank Waste Committee meeting yesterday. Obviously, timelines they move around, but you're planning for something. So once the construction starts, how long would the construction, how long does it take to get to the point where you're saying, here is waste going into a tote in an ideal scenario or a conservative scenario, whatever you're playing with?
So Richard, again, I think just to put it a little more broadly, because like you said, schedules move. We would expect once we receive the RCRA RD&D permit, again, following the WIR evaluation and other regulatory analysis, it would be about a year to what you're saying, allowing for enough time to perform the field work, the construction activities necessary. So sometime in our fiscal year 2023 is just a broad data point.
Okay. And will there be a public process for the permits for this? Will that go through ecology? How does that work?
Yes, there should be a corresponding public comment period, associated with that permitting action.
that is Ecology's process.
Correct.
Any final questions? *6 to unpound on the phone. Drop your name in the chat. We'd love to hear your questions. Cerise, any final questions, hands?
Tracy Baker says that she appreciates us providing the public meeting, having trouble opening the presentation with the link provided, and please verify the link is working appropriately. We can certainly do that. We will double check the link and put it in the chat again for everybody.
Yes, and also if you are having trouble with that, and please just go to type in hanford.gov in your browser, scroll down to the events calendar. It's in the bottom right-hand corner. Click on this meeting, and you'll find the content for the materials. You'll find a way to submit your comments, and there'll also be an evaluation form for you to tell us how we did this meeting and how we can improve. And we'd like to hear from you on all aspects. So unless there are any final questions, I think we will conclude. It looks like looks like Cerise has one more comment.
It looks actually like Liz Matson has one more question.
Please, Liz. Hi.
Hello. How many questions can I ask? My question was about sampling. If anyone can talk about what is the sampling? I guess it seems like there might need to be multiple stages of sampling depending on which route is taken. So I'd assume there's some kind of sampling from the tank to the tote, from the tote to the treatment facility, from the treated waste to the final disposal site. And is that sampling process predetermined, like has to be kind of who is overseeing that sampling process if there's waste being treated off-site? Like how does that oversight work? So I guess it's a two-part question about sampling and then that oversight. Thanks.
So Liz, this is Buddy Cunningham from WRPS. They'll obviously, as you said, they'll be sampling after the ion exchange media so that we understand what it looks like coming out of filtration and ion exchange. Sort of the other side of your question is making sure we understand what the solid waste form looks like. And this is in very broad terms because the scopes of work have not been developed yet. The data quality objectives haven't been outlined yet. We're nowhere near that part in the process. But through the statement of work with whoever the treatment subcontractor is, those objectives will be outlined and they will be required to report through analysis that they've met those objectives. Does that answer your question?
I think, I mean, it sounds like the scope of work would say this is how you have to sample it. Who, like, just how does DOE oversight of that subcontractor in these commercial sites that are being proposed, or I guess or I guess are they all commercial sites? How does that work? So is DOE, is there a presence? Is there like, and maybe there isn't a precedent. So I'm curious how that would work.
So let me correct one thing. The quality objectives will be laid out in the statement of work. So we would say to the contractor, hey, you need to meet the following waste acceptance criteria, land disposal requirements, and they would, through laboratory analysis, demonstrate that they've done that. Those would be reviewed before the waste was able to be sent for disposal. And that's a very simple answer to a much more complex process. But
yeah, and this is Sherry. Can I add to that, buddy? We've already pulled grab samples from the liquid waste in SY 101, and Buddy indicated we will pull samples from the totes after all the pretreatment steps have occurred, and the treatment facility, like Buddy mentioned, will be required to meet the requirements that are specified in that scope of work, including laboratory analysis of the treated waste. But there is an oversight program by DOE. It's called DOCAP. And every facility that we're authorized to use, a commercial facility, goes through an audit program by DOE. And we've looked at their laboratory analysis capabilities and their scope of work, and they're authorized. And that's on I believe it's an annual basis. Every year we look at each facility once. That's an authorized commercial facility for DOE to use. So I hope that helps you get to some of your questions.
Thank you, Sherry. Are there any concluding comments from the presenters, from Sherry, from George, from Carrie? Any final remarks you'd like to say before we wrap this up? Hearing nothing, on behalf of the Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and Washington River Protection Solutions, we'd like to thank you for joining us. A special thanks to Tracy for pointing out that our link was broken. We checked that before the meeting, and we're working with the webmaster now to make sure that link is up to speed. We'll also have an evaluation form that's electronic, and we appreciate that. We've made some changes to our meetings. We've converted to Microsoft Teams, made the the evaluation form electronic, and that's all been based on the feedback you gave to us, so we sure appreciate that. So for everyone, thank you for presenting, thank you for attending. We sincerely appreciate your comments and your questions, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon. So this will conclude our meeting. Have a good afternoon.